Hello and welcome to this video. This is the fourth video of the Reddit opening of the week 3 of 2016, battling rare moves with white, or let's say, battle white's rare moves with black. That would be the right way to put it. So we checked b3, b4 and knight c3 up to now, and going with my from right to left from black's point of view method. It's time for the bird's opening. But I felt that f4 was a little bit more tricky than I thought. Not that this is, my problem there was that what I wanted to do is mostly treat it as a Dutch defense reversed. And this is kind of a little bit much, especially if you recommend it to people who usually play 1e4, that they all of a sudden play the Dutch with colors reversed. Anyway, I take a little bit longer to have something independent against f4 and do that at the... this is the last video that's going to come. Therefore, I will go to the g-pawn moves now, and I will do one g3 and one g4 in one video, which is a bit strange maybe because g3 is probably the best move of all the rare ones, and g4 the worst. So it's kind of a weird coupling, but I felt that if I do a separate video on g4 and a separate one on g3, it will be pretty short video. So let's get going. Let's start with g4, the Grob opening. Named after Henry Grob, who's notorious, famous for inventing that opening. I also wanted to mention a funny quote that I once read in a chess magazine. Grob was, if I remember correctly, married 9 times. And at one point he was asked by someone, "Mr. Grob, are you married?" And he replied, "Almost always." That's a very funny reply in my mind. Anyway, so Grob, he was obviously quite, adventurous person, or how would you call it, 9 wives. Okay, anyway, he played g4. He's the inventor of that move, the namesake. As I said in early videos, it's not particularly great, but we also cannot expect to refute it like from the get-go. You can play, of course, whatever you like in a way, but my recommendation is to go with d5. That has a clear logic. It attacks this pawn. White now has a choice. He can cover it or play bishop g2. Bishop g2 is in a way gambiting that g-pawn, but still the most popular move. After h3, if we look at this, I recommend to play e5, just occupying the center. That's very logical. While white is horsing around there on the flank, we occupy the center. White now goes bishop g2, and my recommendation is to go c6. You can also play other setups. Knight c6 also is quite interesting, but I think that this kind of setup is something to remember against the Grob, and you can play that pretty much regardless of what white is doing. Here white has to do something about the center, and they usually play d4. If white does something else, this is usually d3, and my recommendation is just to develop simply like with this, possibly knight here, and being flexible about the f pawn. Sometimes you can use the f pawn or the h pawn to attack white's flank pawn there on g4. Against d4, I think black's best is to advance and take that space. Here white normally tries to attack this pawn chain. Makes a lot of sense, and plays c4. And I believe here black has a good position. We can again just develop freely with bishop d6, knight c3, knight to e7. This is a good setup. Not knight f6, after which g5 is disturbing the knight. Knight is good on e7. We support d5, and we ask white how he's going to develop here. An interesting moment arises after queen to b3. That move attacks the d5 pawn. Here black can just castle and be okay, but I was quite surprised to see that the #1 recommendation of Stockfish is b5 with an advantage to black. It was kind of funny. What is the point? White takes the pawn, and now after queen takes, we go bishop d7, queen b3, knight bc6. And this is a fantastic compensation for the pawn. Yeah, I mean, black is developed fully, almost. Yeah, we get another tempo, and this is just fantastic for black. Somewhat better is to take with the knight, but again, knight bc6 gives black fantastic compensation. We have given a pawn on the b file there, but our development is great. We get rook b8, we castle, we've got f5. I mean, this is a fantastic position. Black just has a great initiative for the pawn. Okay, that's probably not the most relevant line, but I found b5 was a very, very nice suggestion by the engine. In general, this kind of central formation makes lots of sense. It blunts this bishop, and we have a central advantage. Yeah, this is h3 basically. Sometimes they play bishop g2, just neglecting this pawn. Yeah, in fact, I still recommend to play c6 to, let's say, keep it simple. After c6, white has nothing better than h3 really, and then e5 transposes to the line that we have looked at. So a very simple solution here. One thing, however, is what you can try, which is very interesting. If you want some funny play, some sharp play, you can take on g4. White goes c4, and white's trick in a way here is something like that, like c6, takes, knight c3, e6, queen a4, check. And map. Yeah, this is something to avoid. But what black can do is he can actually take this pawn. This is very interesting because white will take here. That's the only move making some kind of sense. I mean, white is 2 pawns down. He has to take something now. Take here, and now knight d7, giving away the exchange. The position here is in fact excellent. Yeah, after f3, there's e5. The only reason why I'm not recommending this as my main line is that yeah, it's kind of crazy, and quite often people who play the Grob, they want this kind of weird irrational positions. However, objectively speaking, black is quite fine here. Yeah, I said excellent a minute ago. It's probably a bit much, but I think black has great compensation here for the small material investment. White's king is in bad shape, and black has all the fun. So this is especially interesting in a short time control game. Well, you never get g4 probably, or very rarely, so it's not a huge point, but still it's interesting to know this little idea. If someone springs this upon you in a blitz game, you have completely taken over the initiative here after 6 moves. Yeah, this is basically the Grob. Yeah, not much more to know. There are a couple of other things that black can try. Even this is probably pretty good, but it's no particular reason to study that. Just take the center, play c6 to blunt the bishop, and black is more than okay. So the g pawn to 1 g3, g3. This is a wiser move, of course, than g4. It doesn't weaken so much. And maybe objectively speaking, the most promising of all of the non-common moves. Yeah, it's probably the 5th best move, or 5th most popular move after d4, e4, c4, and knight f3. In fact, g3 has relatively little independent value, as we have tons of transpositions. For example, whenever white plays a move knight f3 in one of the next moves, we very likely transpose to some King's Indian attack or some kind of Reti opening. If you play c4 in one of the next 2 moves, 3 moves, we probably go to some kind of English opening. And sometimes, that rarely happens, but sometimes white plays something like a d3 and e4 and keeps the knight back on g1. Then sometimes even a close Sicilian can occur. The independent value, as I said, is relatively little. And what you mostly have to keep in mind is black against g3, that you're not getting move ordered into something that you don't know at all or don't have in your repertoire. For example, if you play e5, you must be ready for white playing c4, which is maybe objectively speaking the best move, going to an English opening all of a sudden, c4, e5, g3. So if you don't have the English with one e5 in your repertoire, e5 is tricky business. If you have that in your repertoire, e5 makes a lot of sense. Yeah? e5, and if they don't play c4, your next move is d5. If you play the move c5, which you can do, then after c4, we got a symmetrical English. It's also something to be ready for then. You, of course, can also play some kind of King's Indian setup, knight f6, g6, and so on. That's also possible. White's relatively inoffensive move gives black a huge choice. It's just very important to understand that you often will transpose into something, and keeping that in mind makes quite some sense. So I don't have a very clear-cut recommendation. It is a completely respectable move. It's not like, okay, like after b4 or g4, you have some clear way of getting very comfortable equality or an advantage. That's not the case here. However, what can happen is that you play d5 or e5, let's say this, and now if they don't play knight f3 and go here, that you get this position. This is something that might frequently occur. And if you play d5 or e5, it makes sense to play the partner move next, here on move 1, to build up that center. This is something that I want to look at briefly in this video, because it's the most, let's say, independent kind of system that white can go for after 1g3. In this position, white mostly goes for two moves, d3 and c4. If white plays c4, you have a choice between a couple of decent moves. My main recommendation is to play d4 and gain the space in the center. However, if you don't like those closed positions, you can also play knight f6, which transposes to an English opening again. Yeah, after c takes, knight takes, and so on, we'll get a mainline English from c4, e5. Or you can, if you want to avoid this kind of theory of the mainline English but still want more of an open position, you can capture on c4. This is also quite simple and not bad at all. Yeah, the positions like after here, c6, queen takes, and knight f6, these positions also resemble some kind of reversed Sicilian. Yeah, something that could happen from an opening like e4, c5, knight f3, g6, d4, bishop g7, d takes c5, queen a5, check. Yeah, black just develops normally, bishop to e6, maybe bishop here, castles. If you want some kind of open, semi-open position, this is a good, decent choice. A bit more ambitious is d4. Well, there are also some lines that are not so sharp after that, but yeah, gaining the center, gaining space in the center and not simplifying is the move d4. Yeah, d3 is normal, knight c6, knight f3, knight f6, castles. This kind of setup is quite normal. I just wanted to mention one particular point, because it still happens in many games that black is making a typical mistake here, the move bishop to e7. This is known for a very long time actually, but still people fail to recognize the move b4 here. This is actually quite awkward for black. Yeah, bishop takes, knight e5 is quite awkward with this idea.
Check.
Or just knight takes, and white again is better, having traded a b pawn against an e pawn. This can be avoided by means of playing bishop to d6 or a5, which is my recommendation here. Simply playing against any b4. Yeah, I think after this black has decent chances for equality, or probably will get equality. The position, however, can be quite interesting. Knight a3, for example, is an interesting move, after which black will continue normally. White plays b3, knight c2, a3, and we have a typical reversed kind of Benoni position. sometimes white players try to open up the center and use their potential development advantage. Here my advice is to take on e3, not to let white take on d4. A position like this, for example, can be tricky for black. The d pawn could be a weakness, and white has easy plans. So, oops, now I completely scratched the whole thing. That was a bad idea. Okay, let's get there again by transposition. a5, e3 takes. Yeah, this is much better. Yeah, taking on e3 and developing. Yeah, here it most of the time gets to a position like that. Takes, and now some c6 and bishop e6. After which black has equalized, even though the position is not super exciting. Has to be said. Yeah, this is what I think is good against c4. If we go back here, there's, by the way, also the option of playing c6. However, I'm not completely sure how to assess this kind of position. If black takes it, I think white maybe has some good prospects after knight f3, and e4 might be good, but it's very demanding from the black player to play, especially if white knows what he's doing. White will, with knight c3, possibly, knight to f4, will get some pressure on the d5 pawn, and this can be quite tricky to play. So I wasn't sure that this is a good recommendation. Just d4 or taking on knight f6 for a more open position is good. The other move is d3 that gets frequently played. And here I recommend to play knight c6. Now knight f3 is quite logical. Yeah, and now black has a pretty wide choice. The most popular move here is to play knight to f6 and then bishop e7, which can easily transpose to what we have looked just a couple of moments ago, even though here b4 is again possible, but here you can castle. My recommendation is different. I have excellent experience with the setup with g6 here. That is, I think, quite interesting. The idea is that black is setting up something like this, and castles h6, and just develop bishop e6, queen d7, just normal development. There's a very comparable system against the Pilz defense with g3, and this is the same thing with the tempo down, which is largely irrelevant. So this is also a pretty good setup. What is somewhat risky, and I wouldn't recommend, is black playing something very ambitious here, some f5, for example. Yeah, this is, I mean, it's not like totally bad, but it stretches things a little bit. Yeah, black playing as he will white, and well, white has dynamic counterplay quite often with c4 and so on. So I wouldn't shoot for that. Yeah, g3, as I said, is heavily transpositional. If you don't mind the English, with c4, e5 is a good move here, or let's say here. If you don't mind this, then e5 is very good. The easiest for many people will be to play d5. As after knight f3, they might have this in your repertoire, or play something with c6, again knight f3 based systems anyway, and very often white will play knight f3 here. One thing you have to be aware of, though, is that white is still able to play the move f4 in some situations. So there might be some systems where white tries to be clever, and let's say it starts with things like that, and black goes here, let's say, and white plays f4, and then you're committed to a setup against the bird's opening that you maybe did not want to play in the first place. In general, I see no reason for a black to not occupy the center here. So my general advice, even though black is very flexible against b3, is to put one of the pawns in the center, and if white allows it, to take d5, e5, yeah, and just take that center. It prevents many uncomfortable kind of transpositions, and limits white's option also, because if you take the center, you're always reducing the opponent's possibilities. One little remark though, if white tries to go to a bird's opening now with f4, then a recommendation from a bird video will be mentioned now. h5 is very interesting now. This very brutal kind of way to proceed is in fact pretty good for black. So this is something that I will talk about in my opening on the bird opening. Yeah, this was the video about g3 and g4. g4, not much to worry about. It's a bit wacky, and yeah, you can fight fire with that exchange sacrifice if white allows it. Otherwise, take the center and enjoy life. Against g3, my recommendation is to put both those pawns in the center, even though it is there's nothing to be said against g6 or c5 or whatever you want. You just have to make sure that you're not tricked into some kind of thing that you don't know. Playing, let's say, the English opening all of a sudden and having no idea about it because you never play 1 e4 and normally answer 1 c4 with e6, then yeah, then it's pretty bad. Yeah, there's also, by the way, nothing wrong with playing a setup based on d5, e6, knight f6, bishop e7. This kind of classical Queen's Gambit type of setup. Yeah, white will very likely transpose into some kind of Catalan or Reti opening. Even though if you voluntarily, let's say, limit yourself in some way like this, maybe like if you for example play here e6, which is, I don't know why you would do that, but let's say you do. Yeah, these kind of ideas get more interesting now. Yeah, maybe trying to shoot for some center here, that polar bear setup that could happen. So no reason to be that modest. Just grab the center and be happy with it. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this overview over the about the g-pawn moves, g4 and g3, and the final video in that series will be about the bird opening, probably to be released on Saturday or Sunday. I'm not sure what I'm going to be able to do, probably only on Sunday. Okay, well, thanks for watching.